Research that resonates.
Schweizer has not been wrong on any of his years and years of reporting on the Bidens.
Investigations that matter.
If your last name wasn't Biden, do you think you would have been asked to be on the board of Burisma?
I don't know. Probably not. But that's, I don't think that there's a lot of things that would have happened in my life that if my last name wasn't Biden.
The only entities, the only people that would report on this, and Peter Schweizer, who deserves a Medal of Freedom, in my view.
This is The Drilldown with Peter Schweizer.
Hi, this is Peter Schweizer, and welcome to The Drilldown, where we relentlessly expose cronyism, corruption, and the abuse of power in Washington, D.C. The host of the program, Eric Eggers. Eric, it's the dog days of summer. The media's gone on vacation. We're actually going to be guest hosting Hannity on Wednesday. That shows you how slow the news cycle is. What on earth are we going to talk about?
I know. This is what happens when we get to guest host. It's exciting to be able to speak to a national audience that's slightly larger than the audience that listens to this podcast. But, oftentimes it's the holidays, and so there's not a lot of, organic news. You always try to, shoehorn references to your book in, things of that nature. It's unclear what we'll discuss. I guess maybe what we'll do is we'll talk about last week's disastrous debate and the unprecedented nature of every single mainstream media outlet calling for the removal of the current president of the United States to be replaced by a candidate to be named later.
Yeah, a remarkable turnaround, because these are the same news outlets that were saying that, all the videos circulating about Joe shuffling around were deep fakes or cheap fakes, depending on which approach they wanted to take. And yet now there's a complete reversal. So we want to talk about that, the implications of it. Can Joe Biden actually be replaced? And then we want to look at who are the two people that are most named as his likely replacement if this scenario plays out. That would be Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom, and a lot of the corruption that people aren't aware of in their climb to power, and why we should have concerns about them if they actually do replace Joe Biden as the candidate for president in November.
The fact that I actively listened to everything you said and responded with an appropriate timbre in my voice and timing in the conversation means I've already surpassed Joe Biden's performance in the debate last week, which is why I think I'm destined for better things than this podcast, right?
And none of the double tilts, where Donald Trump was listening to Joe Biden, he'd kind of look over. They look straight and they look over again like, wait a minute, did I hear that right? None of that. If I see that from you, I will stop and find out what's going on.
So there's so many things we could talk about, but my favorite thing, and by the way, this was good because I have read so much about the media reaction to the debate. I haven't even watched all the soccer that's been on because I've been focused on this. What's your favorite verb that's been used in a mainstream media article to describe Joe Biden's performance? Because I've seen stuff like halting, uneven, spotty. We are stretching the limits of the thesaurus. They're like, okay, it wasn't great, and it wasn't good, and it was also bad, but we need to dress it up a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's right. And the thing that's interesting about Joe Biden is if you look back at his career, there's a lot of people claim that he's this great orator. He's never been that great an orator. When he's had a prepared script or a teleprompter in front of him, even as a senator, he could be quite good, but he's never been that great off the cuff. So the word that I would use to describe him was confused. I mean, he looked confused and looked really bad. I mean, the funniest description that I heard was they said that the reason he struggled during the debate was he was over-prepared, that there had been too much briefing going on, which leads one to think, is the lesson to be learned if he's going into a G7 meeting or he's meeting with a foreign or he's meeting with G? Don't prepare him. Let him just go in fresh because he'll do great. I mean, it's a ridiculous approach. And I think what this has done is not only expose Joe Biden, it's exposed the media.
Right.
Because these are literally the same outlets that weeks ago were saying, no, he's fine. All these videos are being manipulated. And they have done a complete reversal. I've never seen anything quite this stunning before.
The Wall Street Journal looks good because they tried to warn everybody at the beginning of June. They had this article that says Joe Biden is slipping behind the scenes, and some people are seeing it, and that led other people to come out and say, absolutely not. He's never been sharper. Joe Scarborough, we're looking at you, sir. And right, I mean, it's embarrassing now to really, that's what it is. I mean, John Morgan, who is this trial lawyer based out of Florida, is blaming the White House staff and the advisors, Ron Klain, among others, because he's saying, to the over-prepared part. But I don't think that was the problem.
No.
Like him having too many statistics is not the reason why he couldn't breathe and talk at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's not why he lost his train of thought when he got a question about abortion, ended up talking about illegal immigration. I know then it came out, he's got a cold. And I heard the question, I think, on MSNBC the next day. Well, sometimes cold medicine can make you feel foggy and you can be a little confused.
Right.
So pick one, right? Is
Yeah.
it too much information? Is it the cold medicine? Or is it, unfortunately, just the ravages of time and the cognitive decay that happens when you have the most important job in the world? And, by the way, when we talked about this a couple weeks ago, the impact that Hunter Biden's sentencing would have on him and the emotional toll. Your son is now convicted of a felony and faces possible criminal charges unless you intervene. By the way, Hunter Biden, recently convicted felon Hunter Biden, one of the strongest voices imploring Joe Biden to stay in the race per the New York Times. They had this big family Biden summit. They said, guys, this is kind of the business model. If Joe goes...
This is like shutting down the donut shop.
Frank, what do you got cooking?
We're going to run Frank. Let's run Frank
James,
for
how's
president.
those housing a rat going?
Exactly. So other than the holdouts who continue to insist that Joe Biden is fine, and I kind of equate those with sort of like people that still believe that North Korea is utopia, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're so far down the rabbit hole.
Which include Russian children, you were saying. Russian children apparently sent to North Korea for summer camp to do what?
Yeah, my greatest story, I think, that I've seen in a long time. Putin is sending Russian students to North Korea for summer camp. The summer camp includes polishing statues of the North Korean leader. Now, I've had some bad summer camps. I don't know if you've had, but nothing like that.
Okay, so that's actually the one job that's worse than trying to prop up Joe Biden and prepare for a debate.
Exactly. But I think, that debate, I think, is largely over. The question is, and neither one of us pretend to be lawyers or specialists on campaigns. We're going to talk about this on the Hannity Show with actually bona fide experts. But the question is, can Joe Biden actually be replaced? And my sense is, of course, if he voluntarily decides to step down, he can be replaced. But absent that, it's going to be very, very hard for them to do it. Impossible. And even if he does decide to step down in, say, September, it becomes a lot more precarious because it becomes very complicated how you're gonna pick his the person that's going to take his place.
I mean, the New York Times editorial board joined 4 different columnists for the New York Times in calling for Joe Biden to step down. Says, a great man, great president, but for the good of the country, he needs to go. And this just speaks to how much they fear Donald Trump. And I think that actually is the great myth about Joe Biden. It's never been about Joe Biden. It's been about Joe Biden has been the useful vessel to end the Trump presidency.
Right.
And that's why I think it was so quick to see everyone leave, because it's not no one's loyal to Joe. They just really don't like Donald Trump.
Right.
And so as soon as the Trump threat becomes more prevalent, then it's like, all right, well, then we figure something else out. And it should be pointed out the 2 people that I saw in all the post-debate coverage. I mean, Schadenfreude is a real thing for me. Like, I love to go, like, if a sports team that I root for has a really satisfying victory, I love to read the opposing team media because I just want to soak it in, So that's why I was watching CNN and MSNBC on Thursday night, and the 2 people that I saw quite often who had plenty of time to talk, Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris, who now suddenly see their presidential aspirations, I think, on an uptick.
Yeah, that's right. So Kamala Harris is sort of the logical, obvious one because she's the vice president. And again, I don't know how you push her aside. The black woman, you push her aside to replace her with the white dude. I don't know how you do that.
The wealthy white dude.
Yeah, the wealthy white dude, the man of privilege. I don't know how you do that in the Democratic Party. Kamala Harris's poll numbers are as bad as Joe Biden's, even worse.
They're worse than Joe Biden.
Yeah. So, but let's talk about Kamala Harris because I think she is the logical one to take place. I don't see her. I think she's kind of in the Hunter Biden type of camp, which is if Joe Biden steps down, she's staying in. She's not going to, set aside for anybody else. But Kamala Harris is kind of an interesting person. We've done a lot of research on her, and people don't understand. They kind of view her as a empty vessel, as it were. She's had a pretty corrupt rise to power that, leads...
one person's corruption is another person's love story, Peter. I think that's, I think it's actually unfair to the romance that Kamala Harris and Willie Brown had when he was the mayor of San Francisco and she was an up-and-coming and promising attorney. And, Cupid just shot through the heart.
Yeah, it's all I think you have to do is go back and look at the pictures. I mean, he is 60 years old at this time. He's older than her father. She's 29. And it's love and it's romance. And my favorite...
December means nothing to you?
And my favorite part of the story, by the way, is that Kamala Harris's mother endorsed this, defended it, said, no, this is a great thing. Why shouldn't she be able to use, in her words, Willie Brown? And that's kind of what it was. But what I think is interesting about this story is...
fact check. It worked out, right? I mean...
It worked out professionally. Yeah, the romance faded, unfortunately. The petals fell off of the bloom. But what happened is Willie Brown was mayor of San Francisco, and there was a guy that was the San Francisco district attorney named Hallinan, and he was named TKO Hallinan because he was a boxer. He's kind of a tough guy. He was investigating Willie Brown and Willie Brown's friends. And Willie Brown, being Willie Brown, said, I don't like this. So he said, I'm going to take my former love interest, Kamala Harris, and I'm going to run her against Terrence Hallinan. I'm going to raise all this money, and we're going to get rid of all these investigations that Hallinan is engaging in towards me. And that's effectively Kamala Harris's rise to power.
And that's one aspect of it. But I think the far more insidious piece of this, it's the same model, but with, I think, a more tragic and personal aspect to it, is among the cases then that Kamala Harris, because of political connections, did not prosecute, include the friends of Willie Brown, but is not limited to the friends of Willie Brown. I mean, this is the most shocking and damning thing. And I think, to be honest, if Kamala Harris had been a more viable political candidate in 2019 and 2020, some of this would have been vetted and more publicly proclaimed, as you have done in the book Profiles in Corruption. So everything, I mean, this is fun for us because this is all stuff that we know.
It's memory lane.
Hey, you want to replace Joe Biden? That's fine, but just FYI, here's what you might get.
Yeah.
And among the things you might get with Kamala Harris is a lack of prosecution of the Catholic priest sex scandal.
Yeah.
The only, if I recall, district attorney in a major city to not prosecute a case of Catholic sex abuse. And it's not like the priests were innocent.
No.
And she didn't just not prosecute it. Her predecessor, Mr. Hallinan, as you noted, he was aggressively pursuing these cases. Then she takes over. She gets a lot of high dollar donations from the Catholic Church and lawyers connected to the Catholic Church.
Right.
And then doesn't just not prosecute it, but she buries the cases, right? And prevents some of the victims and other people from being able to access that information.
Right. They got Hallinan, her predecessor, got 800 pages in documents from the Archdiocese in San Francisco that looked at cases where the Archdiocese knew that this priest had molested this child. And what Hallinan wanted to do was A, prosecute the cases, and B, release the records, of course, with the names deleted of the victims. So in other words, if you had something happened to you at that time, you would know that this priest had been implicated in other cases. So that was Hallinan's plan. In comes Kamala Harris, her campaign funded by Willie Brown, but also the Catholic Church hierarchy and the lawyers who were also Willie Brown allies, came in, elect her, and what does she do? She drops the cases, these pedophile cases against the priests in San Francisco. Again, the only major city that did not prosecute these cases at that time was Kamala Harris in San Francisco. And she buries the 800-page document, says, no, we're not going to release it. This runs so contrary to every other case of victims of sexual abuse involving Kamala Harris. It's ridiculous.
My favorite was, she's like, you may question some of my morals and ethics and some of the previous relationships I've had with people that are older than me.
Right.
But if I'm so ethically dubious, why is the Catholic Church backing me?
Exactly. I wonder why.
She didn't say that, but she should have, because it would have been a great flex.
Yeah. And there's other cases too. So the Willie Brown investigations that were done by Terrence Hallinan, those were gotten rid of. Then you had these strip clubs in San Francisco, which were sort of dens, or should I say hotbeds of prostitution.
I like when you think you're making an inappropriate joke.
I know, and I always emphasize it.
But
just
it's like
to
in a
make
Waltons kind of way. It's like, oh, mother.
So Hallinan is prosecuting these strip clubs for illegal prostitution. Harris comes in. She drops all the cases. Why does she drop the cases? It's probably because the owner of the strip clubs is Sam Conti, who is a dear close friend of who? Willie Brown, who is, of course, he's also a big financier. There's a guy, Hector Chinchilla, who's on the San Francisco Planning Commission, another big Willie Brown ally, investigated by Hallinan. He was on the Planning Commission and just happened to take $181,000 from developers. He was going to be charged. Kamala Harris dropped those cases as well. And there are numerous others. So the point is, she had a history as San Francisco District Attorney. When she became California Attorney General, at this point, she was now married, right? She had her new husband. Her husband was a lawyer at Venable, a big firm in California. Lots of cases involving clients of her husband's law firm sitting on her desk as California District Attorney General. What does she do? She drops those cases and doesn't pursue them either.
I mean, that's what I think is really interesting about this, and maybe actually the takeaway is that Joe Biden is ununique in the fact that, like, this is just how it works, right? Like, so you don't become elevated to a position of political influence and power without having relationships and being able to leverage those relationships, and you owe people favors, and those people are not shy about wanting to collect on them. But I think it's interesting that if the main criticisms we have of Joe Biden as president from a government corruption standpoint are, hey, do people that do business with his family kind of get special favors and deals?
Yeah.
And some of them are like, yeah, that seems kind of shady. And then there's the piece of it where it's like, no, that's actually maybe a threat to national security. It seems more significant. I would put the Kamala Harris stuff in the shady category. I would put the stuff with Hunter Biden and the Chinese connections in the threat to national security standpoint, which unfortunately the other possible replacement for Joe Biden also has, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Gavin Newsom, who's got excellent hair, it must be pointed out, and he was very vibrant and alive on Thursday night. He's like, come on, I just got done doing some push-ups and sit-ups, and I was talking to Joe. He's very, he had a cold, guys. Let's cut him some slack. But he's for it. He's all about it, and he's available. But he also has, I think, some of the same problems that Joe Biden has in terms of he's got Chinese connections that unfortunately, I think, lead to national security threats.
Well, and I would argue in some respects his ties are even more shady than the Bidens. I mean, the Bidens, as we've talked about many times.
Because with Joe Biden, it's his son who's got the business interest.
It's his son who's got the business interest. And also the people that the Bidens have taken money from are, in the context of China, seen as, quote unquote, respectable businessmen. I'll put that in quotation marks because they have some very shady ties.
Sure.
In the case of Gavin Newsom, he has ties to Chinese organized crime figures.
Legitimately business partnerships with members of the Triad and other Chinese organized crime.
Exactly. I mean, we're not stretching this. We're not stretching the definition of relationship. We're not stretching the definition of organized crime figure.
Right.
I mean, literally, that's the case. Going back to when he was San Francisco mayor, on his transition team, he had a guy who ended up being a so-called dragonhead in Chinese organized crime. He appointed the head of the Chinatown Economic Development Commission as mayor. He appointed the guy that was ahead of that. His last name was Lung. Turns out he was a dragonhead in Chinese organized crime, kind of known at the time. And this pattern continues when, as mayor, he sets up something called China SF. And what was China SF supposed to do?
I think it was going to help give intellectual property rights with Chinese technology.
Yeah, and investment, bring the Chinese into the Bay Area and spend a lot of money. So Gavin Newsom's the head of the U.S. part of it. He needs a Chinese partner. If you were in Gavin Newsom's shoes and you were going to pick a partner, wouldn't you pick sort of like an upstanding businessman who, has a clean reputation?
I'd be looking for somebody with a really cool nickname.
Well, he has friends with really cool nicknames as well. In this case, he picks Vincent Lowe, who at the time is already known to have ties to organized crime, but he has friends with a guy that has, I don't know if it's a cool nickname.
Shrimp Boy?
Would you want Shrimp Boy as your nickname?
I don't know. I think in a cultural context, maybe Shrimp Boy seems more threatening. You know what I mean? We see it as like a cute thing, but maybe I guess there's no year of the shrimp in China, but it could be like this esteemed thing.
Right.
You know?
Right.
No, but the point is, Gavin Newsom has wildly compromised, in our opinion, professional relationships, financial ties, personal ties. I'm laughing, by the way, as you're relating this information, which is in your book Blood Money. I'm remembering when you talked about Gavin Newsom and these same ties to his ex-wife, Kim Guilfoyle. She's like, wait, what? She's like, I didn't know about that. Should I have gotten more money in the settlement, I think was the question that she was asking herself. But and what's crazy about this, by the way, and this just shows you like where the power elite centers are in the Democratic Party. Notice what both the possible replacements have in common. San Francisco, right? Like liberal San Francisco and California. So, and I think what's crazy is that San Francisco is in some ways what I think a lot of people are trying to fight against the country from becoming.
Right.
And rightfully so. And I think that's another problem that Gavin Newsom's going to have is it's not just his business ties. Like we care about that.
But things are great in California.
Oh my goodness, they are not great in California. You told me this. I didn't believe it. But our crack research staff told me that for 4 years in a row, California has had the largest loss of one-way U-Hauls, which like U-Hauls are leaving California in droves, so much so that even a Snopes fact check admits that in 2021, California ran out of U-Hauls.
It's crazy.
That's who we were like. That's who the Democrats might want to replace doddering Joe Biden with. The guy who had so many people leave his state that U-Hauls ran out.
Yeah, and there's huge problems with homelessness, with welfare. You had some interesting statistics about California. I mean, the percentage of the homeless population that is just in the state of California is enormous.
It's I mean, and this speaks to like the larger kind of fiscal challenges. The United States has a budget problem, and I think correctly so. You can blame Donald Trump and Joe Biden for that. And we've talked about the fact that we have a spending problem and special interest, everything else. California though takes that and kind of puts it on steroids. Because of all the federal money for COVID subsidies, Gavin Newsom had a $98 billion budget surplus, but he turned it in 1 year into a $45 billion budget deficit. And the reason for that is because of the massive welfare state that California represents. 31% of the nation's welfare recipients are in California.
Unbelievable. California is about 10% of the U.S. population, and they have 31% of all of the welfare recipients in the entire United States.
Also, you think we have an open border problem now in the United States. Well, guess what fraction of California residents were born outside the United States?
10%.
27.
Oh, 27%.
More than 1 in 4 people that live in California not born in the United States. So, I mean, that's the problem, right? You've kind of got these open borders, and you've got a welfare system that funds it, and to the profound detriment of California's budget.
Yeah. So the challenge here is if you're the Democratic Party, if Joe Biden decides to step down, the two front runners are Kamala Harris, who, again, I think unless Kamala Harris says, I will pass, you've got to give it to Kamala Harris because it would fracture the Democratic Party. But then you've got Gavin Newsom. But I think in either one of these cases, you don't really want to talk about their records, right? I mean, you don't want people talking about California and the problems of California if the nominee is Gavin Newsom because it does not look good. So what you want, I think, is a scenario like in 1992, which is when a relatively unknown governor named Bill Clinton ran for the nomination against George H.W. Bush. I'm sorry, in the Democratic, to run against George H.W. Bush. And very few heavyweight Democrats ran because this was right after Desert Storm.
I remember the Saturday Night Live skit about the first Democratic primary, and it was literally the race to get your blank kicked by Bush.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
That's how they were framing it. Yeah,
because his approval rating was like 81% after the Gulf War. Clinton, of course, this is sort of his history, went all in, and he was rewarded. And he, in 1992, made the entire thing a referendum on George H.W. Bush, who, of course, was the incumbent. I think the only way that Gavin Newsom or Kamala Harris could try to pull this off is if they did the same thing with Donald Trump. The problem is Donald Trump's not the incumbent.
Right.
It's not like George H.W. Bush. Trump has a very good record when it comes to the economy and a lot of things when he was president, and he is not president now. So that's, I think, the gambit, but I don't know how effectively you're going to pull that off. Although, of course, a lot of people in the media are going to play along and try to make that race, make it a race about that.
Yeah, Donald Trump remains wildly unpopular. I mean, the fact, as poorly as Joe Biden did in the debate, they still raised a record amount of money after the debate. I think it's like $14 million in small money donations. This also speaks to the divide that's happening within the Democratic Party because you got the big money donors saying, this is embarrassing, get him out. And the small money people are still like, hey, anybody but Trump, right? So this is our guy, we're in. But the empowered Dem was like, oh, we could do better than this.
Yeah.
Let's swap it out. The New York Times today is saying that they want that the Biden team wants him to stay in. The only scenario in which Joe Biden would get out is if he can be convinced that he has done the thing. He beat Donald Trump. He saved the country, and now can transition back to the next generation of political leaders. it's worth pointing out, and it's amusing that I forgot he originally pledged, Joe Biden did, that he's only going to serve one term.
He did.
So I think it's funny.
And by the way, one of the reasons he said is because he was older.
Yeah. The subhead after the debate was, Biden stumbles, Trump lies. Like they had to make sure to put Donald Trump's lies on the same level as whatever Joe Biden's performance was, which is worth pointing out. The only reason Joe Biden was there is because he lied about not seeking a second term.
And also, I mean, this is the thing that drives you crazy about the media coverage. I read the Wall Street Journal every day, and they did a big article on Trump's lies during the debate. Okay, look, cover what you need to cover. There were a lot of whopper lies that Joe Biden told as well. He said he'd been endorsed by the Border Patrol Union, which is not true. Numerous other things that he had said.
But when you beat Medicare, you're willing to overlook all the other lies, right? I mean, that's a big dub. That's like the Iraq War.
Exactly. Well, we could go on and on and on about this. It is certainly not a quiet political season and not a quiet summer. And we appreciate you listening to this podcast as always, because we know there are demands on your time. Please join us when we guest host for Sean Hannity Wednesday this week. You can find out more about our research course at thedrilldown.com, and you can find this podcast wherever great podcasts are located. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.